Hello, everybody, and welcome to the RFP Success Show. I'm your host, Lisa REHUREK, and today we have got Mark Musgrave with us. And Mark is a management consultant who has advised companies like Nike, many federal government agencies, and the cabinet level of the George W. Bush administration. And now he works with GovPurchase, which is a government market intelligence company out of Washington, D.C., and he knows a whole lot about a lot of things. So welcome, Mark, again to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had Mark on earlier this year. Actually, it was kind of at the end of March. So it was not long after the virus had hit. And we had some conversation around what is COVID going to do to purchasing and what does the RFP landscape look like? And we thought it was really great to bring you back on again now, 9 months later.
Yeah.
And 9 to 10 months later, right? And talk about what we've seen that's maybe changed from then till now and what we see going into 2021. So I really kind of want to kick it off with the first question, which is, since we last talked in March, have you seen any significant changes in the RFP landscape from then till now?
Really not in the RFP landscape. The monies that are allocated to the government agencies to do what they do, are set long ago, if you will. Unlike the commercial space where, businesses are relying on income this month to determine what initiatives they might be able to launch next month. That's not the case in the government. So their monies are there. They've been there for a while. They're continuing with the initiatives. So the RFP landscape, that is to say that the state of opportunities within the government at the federal side is still very good. There's still plenty of opportunities. Now, from what I understand, I have less a consciousness on the state and local, some, but less awareness. Federal still very strong. I understand, and we can see in the news that it's not quite the same at the state and local level. They're struggling a bit more. So they've had to pull the reins back a little bit.
Yeah, we've seen that on the state and local side where they've pulled the reins back a little bit, but what we've seen more of is that they've just extended contracts. And so somebody that maybe had a contract ending sometime in 2020, they've extended it out a year or so. So I'm kind of anxious to see what 2021 is going to bring. Yeah. I feel like there's going to be this flood of opportunity, particularly later in the year when they can't extend anymore and they've got to get it out. And people have started to get used to working from home now, and they've got systems and processes in place for that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, we also have the new administration. We've got a vaccine on the way. So certainly one would hope and pray that by the end of the year, all of that should converge in the economy, and certainly this RFP landscape and on all government levels should be very rich.
Yeah. In the federal space, are you seeing, because I've kind of heard this just anecdotally, that there's a lot of new opportunities on the federal side because of COVID. So things that, if you produce a product or have a service that aligns with what is needed in this COVID landscape, that has actually increased. Have you seen that as well?
Exponentially. I mean, Obviously, in particular with regard to PPE.
Yeah.
So if you're selling gloves or sanitizer or masks or anything along those lines, there's just been, of course, a mad rush. And oddly enough, it would appear that manufacturers have contacted, through some mass marketing program, smaller businesses, because I'm getting a lot of small businesses coming to us who are not in that space saying, I have a printing company that's a client who says, and all of a sudden I have gloves and masks and sanitizer to offer. So everyone is, not only is that space enlarged, but everybody's rushing to it. We're still in need as a country, but we're almost a little late to the game because everybody's trying to supply the government with PPE right now.
Right. And I don't know if this is a question that's kind of out of your bailiwick, but are you seeing them having success? Because it feels like, if they don't have a track record in it, it's a little bit hard to win some of that business historically, but maybe they're not caring as much about that now.
It would appear that they're not caring as much about that. I mean, there's a desperation. Now, right now, given that everyone would appear has PPE to offer, I would say the competition is greater, although there's still a need. But I see in the federal contract records, companies that were obviously set up just for the purpose of selling PPE that had heretofore not been in that business by a stretch, who just set up to provide PPE. Some of them got in, made millions of dollars, and got out. I mean, I can't even say some of the names of the companies because they just put kooky names on some of these companies. I mean, they obviously literally found PPE, got in, sold it, and split.
Well, hey, way to jump in and make it happen, right?
Absolutely.
I love that.
Absolutely. It was a need and they filled it. And and there still are needs. And, and you mentioned ancillary products. You said any product that can contribute. So there are other, well beyond PPE, there are many other products that folks are marketing that can be of assistance. One of them is a cell phone battery that kills the virus in the phone. Virus can't live on the phone when this battery exists. And there are other technologies like that. So yeah, people are taking advantage of our need for them.
That's really interesting. The other thing that I see, and this is going to be a little bit of shift in conversation, is I feel like probably more so in the corporate side of things versus necessarily the government side, is that there's going to be a need for people to help corporations through the employee demotivation, lack of communication or change in communication. Because I think I would say that in the beginning of this, right, March, April, May, we thought, okay, well, everybody's going to work from home for 2-3 months and then everything will get back to normal, whatever that was going to look like. I'm not sure. A lot of people thought we were all going to be working from home for the entire year, and then probably well into 2021. And you and I had an interesting conversation where there was some information that came out from Gallup. It was before the virus, but it was all about employee engagement. So can you tell us a little bit about that study? Again, I want to preface that this was before the virus, but it's going to kind of flow into the conversation here. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Gallup recently published a book. It's called It's the Manager, and it was born of research that they've done recently and really have been doing for many, many years. There is a long-standing problem in this country. It's at least 20 years old with regard to employee engagement. Their research demonstrates or tells us that only 15% of employees feel engaged at work. That is to say, they dig what they're doing. They're motivated to do their work. That means 85%. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Other studies from Forbes, for example, suggest that as many as 25% of people say they hate their job.
Wow.
So according to Gallup, we can see evidence of this in our GDP per capita. That is to say, when you're looking at the performance or the productivity of individuals, we're suffering. The bottom line is suffering because people don't like what they're doing. And when you ask them why they don't like what they're doing, at the top of their list always are human problems. And they point, unfortunately, to their managers. Number one problem, they don't feel respected at work. So now we have a disconnect, a physical disconnect with people working away from, their bosses. And this has had both a positive and negative effect in that sometimes that space, if you felt pressure at work, can be beneficial. Other times, where communication was weak before, it could be completely defunct now. So, this is a long-standing issue that we need to address that is just that much more acute right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I had a conversation with a friend this past weekend, and it was a little bit of a heated discussion because we were talking about how money is such a motivator, and I was vehemently disagreeing. And not that people don't want to be paid fairly, but when you look at all the studies and all the statistics, it talks about money not being the thing that people are upset about or that makes them disengaged. It is those human elements that you're talking about: feeling disconnected, feeling disengaged, not liking what they're doing, not being challenged, not having the ability to solve problems or have ownership to things. Those tend to float to the top. in the world of kind of that virtual, now we're virtual, most of us, I mean, I know there are companies out there that have gone back to work, but I still think the majority of Americans are working from home.
Yeah.
How do you think this is going to kind of flow into 2021 with this disengagement?
Well,
It's a big question.
we've become adept at using these tools of technology. You know, I heard someone say recently that what we've been trying to get right for the last 20 years with regard to remote work, we now have down to a science because we were forced to do it. I mean, many of us, myself included, have found the transition easy.
Right. Right.
Really. And I never would have thought, and I've heard from others in senior positions, they never would have thought that their employees would both A, be able to make the transition so easily, and B, still be productive. So, you know, we've made the transition. So I think we're good there. When it comes to the engagement issue, which is a big issue to tackle, the same skills will be used virtually as were used in person. I mean, I can demonstrate respect for you, whether we're together in the same place or we're online like this. I can afford you agency, that is to say, autonomy, or the ability to inject your creativity into your work virtually or in person. So, you know, the skills that we need to adopt as leaders, as managers in the workplace, are going to hold true regardless of whether we're working remotely or together in person.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I worked from home before, so it wasn't a huge change or shift for me either. But it's interesting because I almost feel like it feels easier to engage right now because people are so much more present than they were before. People are picking up their phone. People are craving that human interaction.
Yeah.
And I think that, I mean, are you seeing that as well?
Sure. I mean, well, I think perhaps at the top of the list of reasons is that we're scared. You know, people are many people are hungry for business. You know, while the government RFP landscape is still rich, is still strong, many of my customers are still struggling because their customers aren't paying on the B2B side. The government's paying, but there's still a lot of challenge to our economy. So, you know, people are alert and aware. They're sitting up in their chairs because they need to be engaged. There are no guarantees at this point. It is still a struggle for many.
Yeah, it really is. And I find too, there's this emotional connection that people need. Whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, it feels like everybody's needing it. They need that energy. They need the emotional connection.
Yeah.
What do you, other than, you know, hopping on a Zoom call, what do you think managers need to be doing to continue, again, kind of going into 2021? I think, I feel like everybody wants 2020 to be over, but we're going to roll into 2021 and it's not magically going to change overnight. And so I do think there's going to be a little downward energy about mid-January when people realize like, oh, we're still in this. What do managers need to do to help employees elevate that, to have that emotional connection, to make sure that they stay as engaged as we can get them to be?
Yeah. You know, as a psychotherapist, former psychotherapist anyway, I have to remind myself that when I'm talking to managers, when I'm coaching managers, I have to remind myself that they're not therapists and are not to play that role. Yet we have to be humans and we have to acknowledge humanity. So what do managers need to do? They need to check in with the human being that's on the screen. Not just how is work going along, but, you know, even before when we were in person, we needed to be more human. We needed to see more of the human and less the resource in human resource. And that's all the more true right now because people are scared. People are hurting. People are suffering. There isn't anyone who's not affected. So even if your employee is still employed, and you're still sending them the check, they're probably less sure about the security of the business. They may have a loved one or know someone who has fallen prey to the virus. They may have a spouse or a family member who's out of work. So whereas we needed to inject a little more humanity into what we were doing before, it's just that much more true now.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I love talking to you because you have so much great experience. Like you're not just about RFPs, right? You've got this whole human element. And one of the things that I want to say is, like, if our employees are disengaged, our RFP responses are going to reflect that, right? If they're demotivated, they're not putting as much into that. And what's interesting in what you're talking about is that, to me, it sounds like it's really not any different. We feel like it's so different, but it's still the same strategies and tactics that all managers should have been doing all along, which is connecting, being present, listening, asking, how are you? I mean, we also just came off of extremely charged election. That's still going to kind of flow into January. So tensions are high, emotions are high. So I love this conversation. And
Me too.
so again, kind of back to the whole RFP side of things and thinking about our staff needing to feel energized and motivated in order to put that into RFP responses to win that business, right? Do you see any trends? I mean, we talked about this a little at the beginning of the call. Do you see any trends for 2021 when it comes to responding to RFPs that might change because of everything that's been going on?
I don't know if I'm seeing things that are on the cusp of changing. I mean, this is your area of expertise more than mine. I have always been of the opinion, however, that in the same way we should inject humanity into our behaviors at work, that a lot more humanity and creativity can be injected into RFPs. I am of the mindset, and have had success with proposals because of this, that there's a human being receiving this RFP too, and they no more want to read through 50 pages of jargon than I want to create it. So the last big consulting firm well, they weren't big, but the last prominent consulting firm I worked for, we had a lot of graphics, a lot of pictures. We used a lot of conversational language. We injected our creativity and our humanity into the proposal, and people would literally thank us. I mean, go out of the way to say, thank you. I'm sitting in this dank office having to read through, these RFPs that go thud when they land on my desk. I don't want to do that. So I'd love to see more. I'd love to see more humanity injected into our management of human beings, our treatment of one another, and our creative processes. And ultimately, and you're the expert here, an RFP is a creative, or the proposal development is a creative endeavor.
I really love that you said that, because if you think about everything we've been talking about with employees, you're just then now submitting your RFP response to an employee of an entity, right? And they're emotionally maybe disconnected, or their energy is all over the board because of what's been going on, just like the rest of us. And to your point, they don't want to be reading something that drains them further of their energy, which some of those highly technical proposals can do. So I love that you said that, inject more humanity. Do you feel as if the PPE equipment on the federal side is still going to be a big play in 2021?
Well, it certainly looks as though it's going to take some time to get the vaccines out to everyone. And the vaccine is not going to do anything for those who are currently suffering. So I think PPE is going to be around for some time. And if you look at the current solicitation landscape, the RFPs that are out now, or the RFQs that are out now, they're still wanting very much for, not to comment on our administration, but people, agencies, businesses, governments have largely been left to their own devices to procure what they need. So instead of there being some sort of centralized effort that, well, I won't comment on whether that would be good or bad, but said simply, It's not centralized. Therefore, I'm still seeing lots of requests for all of the normal stuff. I mean, we're in what, wave 2 or 3, depending on your perspective, and it's worse than ever. And therefore, masks and sanitizer and all the stuff that goes with it is still very much in need. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Again, without getting political or one-sided, right? How does it usually change the procurement landscape when a new administration comes in? And how long does that take to kind of grab hold?
Well, as I think our current president found out, left to their own devices, the agencies largely run themselves. I mean, they call themselves the weebies. We be here when you get here, and we be here when you leave. Because we have all these transient professionals here in DC that come in with the administration, but we have many, 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 many more folks who have been here for sometimes decades and are still going to be here for decades. So the current administration, or the upcoming administration, could come in and largely leave things alone, and they would just keep on trucking right along. What's going to happen, however, is they'll come in with the president's management agenda and his platform, and it looks like they're going to try to be very active very soon, as they always do. But I would bet that a lot of stuff is going to actually get done here in the first 100 days. So there are going to be some opportunities popping up, no doubt, but you won't notice, I don't think, a great deal of difference in what you're seeing in that RFP landscape. They have, you know, our government just is the largest single buyer in world history. That buying is just going to keep on trucking no matter what happens. We spend a lot of money.
Yeah, so there's a ton of opportunity. And even, you know, on the state and local side, again, from my perspective, I see that that's going to start shifting upward. It already has started shifting upward. I think part of the problem with state and local coming in was just them having to go home and work from home and figure out how to do all of this remotely. And I think they're now in that positioned well there and can start getting back to business as usual with regards to contracting and buying and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I did notice there was a little lag when folks first went home. The RFPs were still out there, but the procurement folks, you know, had to take a beat so that they could sort of get settled at home. Not all of them were able to transition. Not all of them had the technology, because these aren't, I mean, these are just workers, regular folk, right?
Just like us.
Like us. They didn't always have the tools that they need. So it took them a little while, but you're right. At this point, it does appear that everyone is, you know, well in command of their tech.
Yeah, and I would say to all of our listeners, whether it's state, local, or federal, you're still going to have a lot of opportunity. So one of the things that I'm hearing a lot is people will say, well, we submitted something back in April and we haven't heard anything yet. Don't let that discourage you. Keep responding, keep getting it out there, because there is, like you said, they have to continue to buy. The government technically cannot shut down, right? They're going to keep moving. So keep on going. Maybe you have to shift a little bit, but there is a lot of opportunity, and I would encourage everybody out there to keep going for it. Even on the corporate side, I think also the corporations are starting to settle in a little bit more. They might be a little bit more gun shy with spending as much money as they were going to. So they might have, you know, kind of gone back to basics, but there's still opportunity out there.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I think logic serves well in these situations. It's taken folks in the government and procurement a little extra time. Larger corporations are going to have, you know, more substantial cash resources than smaller folks. So, but the economy is, you know, it's kept moving.
Yes.
You know, there are still opportunities, and certainly in the government space, it's still very, very rich with opportunity.
You know, we were just, I was just listening to a pod or a webinar or something like that, right? With Antelie Brewers, who is amazing. She's very involved in the corporate space. And, you know, she was talking about how it hasn't necessarily slowed down, but it's shifted. And so if you are listening to this and you're somebody who has historically responded to RFPs for corporations and those things are going away, check and see what they're shifting to, because there's a lot of new opportunities that are being uncovered. There are some industries we know have been decimated, right? Everything in the
Right.
hospitality world and all of that. But there's also some industries that have flourished in this. And so you've got to kind of shift your perspective and pivot. And that's who the most successful businesses have been, the ones that have managed to stay the course in 2020 and grow, have been the ones that have pivoted. So I think that that's something that people need to be paying attention to.
I agree. And what I have said to my clients of late is to take on the mindset that always orients me, and that is that of service. So we're in a crisis right now. And if this is how you should always think about your customers, your clients. You're there to serve them. But right now people are struggling. So think first before you approach, and think before you even decide who you're going to approach, or which company you're going to approach, or which agency. Where are they at this point? What do they need? How can I best serve them? People are struggling. And if you show up to provide aid at a time of struggle and suffering, well, you're going to be successful.
Yeah, I always tell people that it's like, if you can give them a little bit of a sigh of relief, if you can just hear that little, their shoulders, relax a little bit more, you're golden. And the other thing to what you're saying is, it means you got to do a little bit of research, right? You got to do a little bit of diligence. And in the RFP space, for whatever reason, people think, I don't really need to do research. I'm just going to respond to this RFP and I'm magically going to win this business. Well, it doesn't really work that way. So
no, quite the contrary, in fact.
Quite the contrary. That's great. Well, Mark, it's been so lovely to have you here again. Tell us a little bit about GovPurchase. I just touched on it right at the beginning, but tell us a little bit more about your company.
Sure. It takes a fair amount of intelligence, of data, to do business development, to sell effectively to the government. Especially if you're new to this space, you're going to need not only the data, but guidance. And we provide folks with that. So we're going to, if you've never sold to the government before, we're going to help you understand how to do that effectively, where you need to register, all of that good stuff. And then we're going to provide you with all the data that you need on open solicitations, RFPs and RFQs, RFIs, what the contract history has looked like, who your buyers are likely to be, give you their contact information, and then all the information you would want about other vendors, your competitors, or your potential partners, or primes to your subs to your prime. So we help people to identify and win government business.
That's amazing. They're a great company. We've used them for a couple of years now. Really great company to connect with if you need that data. And if you're responding to particularly federal RFPs, you definitely need to be connected to Mark. So Mark, how do they get in touch with you?
They can email me at mark.musgrave@govpurchase.com. And they can reach me at 202-751-9435. Of course, we're online at govpurchase.com.
Wonderful. Well, we will have all of that in the show notes. And again, I'm so appreciative of you being here and talking through what we're going to see over the next, over the next year, or at least going into 2021.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. You've been listening to the RFP Success Show. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so that you will not miss an episode, and we'll see you back again here next time.